everybody, it's Sarah and today I am doing the classics book tag. I was tagged by Julie Ottenbuck, so I will leave her channel and her video linked down below. I will also leave the original tag linked down below, which I believe was a blog post and I do not know who created it, but I will leave it linked down below if I can find it anyway. As the name suggests, this tag is all about classics, and while I would say that I'm not like a person who has read the most classics ever, I do think that I have read a fair amount, and I have started reading classics quite a bit more regularly, like in the past year in any case, and that's something that I really enjoy. I kind of really enjoy diving into classics and kind of trying to find out the context of the time that it was written in and so on. I just really love that. But before this intro gets too long, let's get into the questions. The first question is a classic that in my opinion is overhyped, and I actually have two answers for this question because one is very much a modern classic, and that is The Catcher in the Rye by... I forgot the name of the author. I think it was something Salinger. But yeah, I had to read this, as a lot of people, for required reading in school, although I had to read it for English, of course. I mean, everyone has to read it for English, but like for me, English was my second language. That's what I meant. And yeah, I really hated it. And I wasn't the person who hated books just because they were required reading. There were quite a few books that I read because of that I ended up really enjoying. But The Catcher in the Rye wasn't one of those, and I really couldn't see the point of that book, and I absolutely hated it. And then the second classic that's like a proper classic is a classic where I'm not sure if I would say it's overhyped. With classics, I very rarely feel like they're overhyped. A lot of times I just think they're not for me and I find them boring, but I can still see why they have become so important for literature. But the classic that I'm talking about is Emma by Jane Austen. I read this last year and I gave it 2 stars. I was mostly just bored throughout, but at the same time I can still see why Jane Austen is such a celebrated author and how for her time period she had like really strong female characters. But also I just really didn't like her writing style and I didn't like her storytelling, so yeah. That's why I chose this for this answer. Question number 2 is my favorite time period to read from. And I have to add a little like caveat to that, because I feel like it's really misleading to say you enjoy reading from this or that time period. Because, and I think this should be obvious, but I have found, and I'm sorry if I sound a bit salty and a little bit insulting because I don't mean any offense, but I have found that especially like Anglo-American people find it very hard to imagine that education and literature and like that they're not the center of the world. And so I have found that a lot of times that people use Victorian as a time period, as like a general time period, when you absolutely cannot use Victorian for anything in literature or history or anything in Germany, Austria, France, or anywhere else in Europe really, except for Great Britain and then obviously also Ireland and then the colonies. I'm also not sure from when until when the Victorian time period is exactly, because I never learned it in school, because obviously I didn't learn about English literary periods, but I learned about German literary periods. And that period in time when the like Victorian period in Britain was, I think it was Romanticism, Naturalism until like turn of the century literature in Austria. But I'm also kind of not that sure about Austrian time periods anymore. I guess the very short answer would be that yes, I do enjoy Victorian literature because I read mostly English written classics by British authors / Irish authors, although I guess at the time it's basically the same anyway because the Irish were still part of Britain. But I also don't think that it 100% fits because the time I enjoy mostly is like turn of the century plus minus 20 years. So I guess it goes into Edwardian literature already. I don't know what you call the literary period after Victorian thing. And yeah, Victorian would fit for me, yes, because I have found that personally I don't enjoy German / Austrian classics that much. I don't enjoy the writing that much, although Viennese, Austrian turn of the century literature is amazing because it's just really sarcastic because everyone was pissed off at the monarchy, and they got like really amazing jokes in that literature if you know like what's happening around it. So yeah, that's a very long answer for a very short question. Next is my favorite fairy tale, and I'm gonna be salty again because I don't understand why all the most famous fairy tales out there are the ones that in my opinion are the most boring ones. And that's again something that I'm just from Austria. It kind of comes with the nationality that I have read the full collection of the Grimm's fairy tales, or pretty much the full collection of the Grimm's fairy tales, and that I've also read most of them in the original. And yeah, I mean, I haven't read The Beauty and the Beast in the original, but that's not part of Grimm's fairy tales, but that's French, you know? And like pretty much the only one that I enjoy of the like classic fairy tales is Cinderella, because it's just so amazingly bloody. And I mean the original, like the Disney remake is boring, but like the original where the stepsisters hack off their toes and heels, it's beautiful. But anyway, my favorite fairy tale since I was a little child is The Goose Maid. I'm just holding up this page because this illustration is from The Goose Maid. It's about this princess who ends up being a goose maid, and her horse is slaughtered, and then she starts talking to the dead head of the horse, and the horse starts talking back or something. And yeah, it's a really grim fairy tale, but I do really love it. And I can just highly recommend picking up originals of Grimm's fairy tales because they're just amazing. I love them. They're so bloody. Question number 4 is the classic that I am most embarrassed that I haven't read yet. And I don't have a specific classic that I'm most embarrassed I haven't read yet, but Dorian Gray, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde is my favorite classic, my favorite book of all time. And I'm kind of embarrassed, just like for me personally, that I have never picked up any of his other works. I do have a collection of his plays right here. I haven't read any of his plays yet, I haven't read any of his other essays, and I do not understand why I haven't picked any of them up yet. So yeah, that's why I'm just personally embarrassed that I haven't read any of his other works yet. Next are the top 5 classics that I wanna read soon, and for those I have 2 kind of rereads and then 3 books that I just gotta read for the first time and that I probably wanna read next as classics if there aren't any other classics that I draw from my TBR jar. And the first of the rereads is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is one of my favorite books from my childhood, and I just love the story so much. It's so much fun, and the last time I read it was during my final year in high school because I had it as part of my final paper for English. I kind of wrote about child protagonists in like English language literature, and so that's one of the classics that I chose. And yeah, I really love it from my childhood, from later on, and I really need to go and reread this. Next is my kind of reread, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I actually only recently reread The Picture of Dorian Gray, I think back in October or November, but this right here is an annotated, uncensored edition. I have shown it a few times already on my channel. And for those of you who don't know, there's actually 2 versions of the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. One I think was published in 1890 in a journal, I believe, and after that got really popular, Oscar Wilde republished The Picture of Dorian Gray as a novel a year later, I think in 1891. However, he did censor quite a lot, especially of the homoerotic subtext in the novel. Actually, the original one, the uncensored one, was also used kind of as a proof in his trial for, like, I don't know what they called it, like, but in his trial that he's a homosexual, basically. And yeah, so I finally really need to read this uncensored version, the version that you usually get when you pick up an edition or a copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray is of course the censored one, the later one. And yeah, I need to go ahead and read this. Then one of the classics that I finally need to read is Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. I had this time when I was 12, 13 when I just picked up a bunch of vampire classics. All of them in English. The problem was just that me at 12, 13, my English abilities weren't yet good enough to read classics that were written in the 19th century and earlier. Even a lot of like modern books I wasn't good enough to read yet in English. And so I back then also picked up Carmilla, and since then it has been on my shelf for over 10 years. And yeah, I really need to finally read this, especially since it's only like 70 pages long. I also really finally need to read Moby Dick by Herman Melville. I did start this already like 3 years ago, and I got about a quarter or a fifth of the way in. However, I did set it down again, not because I didn't enjoy it. In fact, I enjoyed it so much. But I picked it up right after I had read a bunch of other classics, and I just really felt myself getting into a reading slump because I was reading, and I really felt myself getting into a reading slump because I was reading so many classics, one after the other, and that's just not the type of person I am. And since then, I've been kind of like not picking it up again because it's so long, and yeah, that's just scary to me, even though I did really enjoy this book. I mean, what I read of it. And then the last classic is the classic that I decided I'm going to read this year, or have read by the end of the year, and that is Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory. And I wanted to read like the entire year, but I just didn't pick it up for some reason. I mean, I did pick it up, but I read like 15 pages. Yeah, about 15 pages. And yeah, so this will be done by the end of the year. It has to be done. This is also, for those of you who don't know, this is like the most well-known written down version of the Arthurian legends and the legends of the Knights of the Round Table. So yeah, I need to pick it up. Favorite modern book based on a classic, and for that I chose The Queens of Innislia by Tessa Gretton. This is a retelling of Shakespeare's King Lear, and so the basic story is you have 3 daughters of a dying king, and to determine who is going to be his heir, this king tells them to prove to him how much they love him, and the youngest daughter, who in fact loves him the most, refuses to take part in this game, and so the king exiles her, and it's just tragedy all around. And I absolutely love this book. It actually has quite a low rating on Goodreads, but I think the reason why that is that a lot of people went into this like expecting this political, fast-paced, intrigued high fantasy. However, that's not really what it is. It is very much a slow-paced and character-focused story. And I just really love that about it. It's really about the characters and about their interactions and how they influence each other with their decisions and so on. And so if that's something that you think you'd be into, I would highly recommend picking this up. Because that's also something that I've found. The people who went into this not expecting anything and not expecting this fast-paced high fantasy, all of them loved this book. And so yeah, I definitely can recommend this. Next is my favorite movie or TV show based on a classic, and I haven't seen that many movies or TV shows that are based on classics, and so I decided to go with The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, the Peter Jackson adaptation, because The Lord of the Rings is classic fantasy after all, or is a fantasy classic. I just love those movies. I think they hold up still so well, and I think they're pretty much the perfect adaptation of a book to a movie. Like, they cut away what they needed to cut away, and they added what they needed to add, and even though all of them are almost 3 hours long, I don't feel like I'm sitting there watching a 3-hour movie, and they're just amazing and so great. Then after that we have the worst movie that is an adaptation of a classic. And again, I really only have one answer, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray, the 2009 film. I think that's when it came out, the one with Ben Barnes. And I love Ben Barnes a lot, and I do think that he portrayed Dorian Gray okay, but the movie is just a train wreck. It has nothing to do anymore aside from the general plot with what the book was about. Like, all the themes are completely gone in my opinion. They made Dorian Gray straight. The homoerotic subtext was, I mean, there was one kiss, I think, but aside from that, the homoerotic subtext was completely gone, and it's just a train wreck and it's horrible. I hate it. The second to last question is my favorite editions of classics, and I have two types of editions here. The first one are the Word Cloud Classics, and I really love them. I love how simple they are. They just have the embossing of some quotes on the front and then one quote on the back, and they have the embossing of a symbol on the spine, each of them, and it's just, they're really, really beautiful and really nice. I also love the feel of them. Of course, you can't really see it through the camera lens, but I know I showed one of them to my mom and she was also like, ooh, they feel so nice to read. And so that's one of the editions. And then the other edition are those illustrated editions right here, mostly of like books that are now children's books or that have been turned into children's books. Not all of them, I think, started out as children's books. And they're those editions illustrated by Robert Inkpen, and I sadly only have the Jungle Book so far, but they just have those really beautiful illustrations inside that I absolutely, absolutely love. And yeah, so that's the second type of book that I love, and I do want to kind of continue collecting them. I think they have at least Peter Pan as well, that I might get soon. And then the last question is an underhyped classic, and for that I chose The Seawolf by Jack London. Jack London is quite well known for his two like wolf books, White Fang and The Call of the Wild, and I think The Seawolf is probably also one of his more well-known works. However, I don't see people talk about this enough. This is kind of like a shorter Moby Dick, but also not really, aside from the fact that it's set on a whaler and it's about this dude who just randomly ends up on this whaler and you don't really know what he's doing there. But I absolutely loved it when I started this book. It's one of the few books that I have actually kind of annotated. I mean, I did like mark a lot of quotes, and you just have those amazing discussions between our main character and then the captain of this whaler, who is not the morally most likable person, but he's just such a charismatic character, and I absolutely love The Seawolf, so I can highly recommend you go and pick this up. And that was it for this tag video. Tell me in the comments down below your thoughts on the classic that I talked about and what your answers would be for this tag. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!